Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, which is Eruvin Daf Kuf Beis. We are at the Mishnah, 3 lines from the top of the Amud. It says in the Mishnah, Neger HaNigrar. Neger is that bolt which is inserted in the threshold to lock the door. This Neger is tied to the door, but it's dragging a bit on the floor. Now, in contrast with the previous Mishnah, where the Neger had this feature of the glustera, which was a round, a thick top. The head was round and big, and enabled it to be used for crushing spices. So it gave it the appearance of a kli. In which case, we treated it more leniently. This Mishnah is speaking about a Neger which does not have that glustera, which does not give the appearance of a kli. So it's just a typical bolt used to close that door, you place it in the threshold, thereby locking the door. Now this Neger is tied to the door, but it is dragging a bit on the floor, in which case it doesn't necessarily appear like it's part and parcel of that door apparatus, and there's an ism d'Rabbanan to use it, because it can appear like it's just a simple bolt which is inserting into the ground a nail, and perhaps it looks like he's doing binyan, like he's involved in construction, which is, of course, is the Av Malach on Shabbos. Therefore, the Mishnah says, Neger HaNigrar, this dragging bolt, Noi Alan Boy B'Migdash. It can be used in the Beis HaMikdash, where the Rabbanan suspended their Isurim. For the sake of the Avodah, we know there's a klal, Ein Shavus B'Migdash. So therefore, using this Neger, which only entails Isat Rabbanan, if it gets in the way of the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, you can go ahead and use it regardless. Avaloi B'Medina, but not outside the Beis HaMikdash, because it entails an Isad Rabbanim, because it appears perhaps like he's using it to build. So that's regarding the Neger, which is tied to the doorway, but it is dragging. What if it's not even tied at all? V'hamunach, it's just simply lying around. Kan v'kan aser. That cannot be used in the Beis HaMikdash or outside the Beis HaMikdash, because that entails an Isad Araisa. Rashi says it's binyan mamash. He's actually building. He's taking this bolt, which is not attached to the door. It's not part of the doorway structure. And he's inserting it into the threshold. That involves an isam d'oraisa of binyan. So regardless of whether it's in or out of the Beis HaMikdash, it's also. So according to Tanakama, if it's lying around, it's asam d'oraisa. If it's hanging but dragging on the floor, asam d'Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, he takes a step down. Hamunach mutar b'mikdash. If it's just lying around, then since it's been designated to be used for this purpose, he says it's no Issa d'Oraisa. There's no binyan taking place. At most, it's only Asam d'Rabbanan. It appears perhaps like binyan. Therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, in the Beis HaMikdash, that would be mutar. V'hanigrar b'Medina. If it's actually hanging on the door, but it's dragging, in that case, says Rabbi Yehuda, it's not even Asam d'Rabbanan. Therefore, it can be used b'Medina outside the Beis HaMikdash as well. So, in conclusion, the dragging bolt, according to Tanakama's Asam d'Rabbanan, if it's just lying around without an untied, detached bolt, according to Tanakama, it's Asam not Torah, it's binyan mamash. Rabbi takes a step down. He says, if it's tied, then it's mutar completely. If it's just lying around, detached, then it's asur, but only midrabban. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, we learned in a brayse, Ezer Neger HaNigrar, Shenoylim b'Migdash, Avaloi b'Medina. How do we describe this dragging bolt, which can be used in the Beis HaMikdash, but not outside of it, because it appears perhaps like binyan, and therefore it's asam d'Rabbanan. This, of course, is the Tanakama. So, how do we describe this? Kol shekosher v'toli, this bolt which is tied and hanging off the door. However, v'roisha echad magil arts. At least one side, the bottom side, is touching the ground. So this is considered to be nigrar, even if only one side of it, even if it's not completely on the ground, just one side is coming into contact with the eretz. That cannot be used outside the Beis HaMikdash. That appears like binyan. It doesn't necessarily look like it's part of the doorway structure, and therefore, according to the Tanakama, this is Isam d'Rabbanan, and cannot be used outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yehuda Kessler, Ze'af b'Medina mutar. This type of bolt can be used anywhere, because it's tied to the door. So it's designated for the door. It's part and parcel of the door. There's no Isam d'Rabbanan whatsoever. Ella ezo neger shenoi alan b'migdash avaloi b'medina. Rather, What exactly is a bolt which can be used in the Beis HaMikdash and not outside of it? One which is nor tied, nor hanging. He simply takes it out of the threshold. When he's done, takes it and puts it in the corner of the room, meaning it's totally detached from the structure. This, according to Rabbi Yehuda, entails an Ism D'Rabbanan and can be used in the Beis HaMikdash, but not outside of it. However, there's no Ism in HaTorah, regardless, because Rabbi Yehuda maintains, since it's been designated for this purpose, it doesn't have a din of construction material. And therefore, in HaTorah, it's mutter. It's only D'Rabbanan, which it's Asr, and therefore only outside the Beis HaMikdash. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Halach Rabbi Yehuda ben Nigrar. So, Rabbi Yehuda gives us two chidushim. Number one, he says, if it's completely detached, then it's only Asr D'Rabbanan. When it's tied to the door, even when it's dragging, that's mutter completely. So there are two elements to Rabbi Yehuda. How does halacha follow? Says Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Nigrar. In one element, we follow Rabbi Yehuda's shita. When it's dragging, in which case we say it's mutter completely. Because since it's tied to the door, it's visibly part of the door structure, and therefore even if it's dragging a bit on the floor, it's okay, and can be used anywhere, whether in the Beis HaMikdash or out of the Beis HaMikdash. So in that element we follow Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that there's no Isser involved whatsoever. However, when it comes to the completely detached bolt, we don't follow Rabbi Yehuda, who says that there's no Isser in HaTorah and therefore can be used in the Beis HaMikdash. No, when it comes to that facet, we don't follow Rabbi Yehuda's shita. So we follow Rabbi Yehuda only partially. Only when it comes to the nigrar, since it's tied, so although it's dragging, we say it's mutter completely. Amar Rava. You meant to know that the heter of nigrar is only when it's tied to the door itself. Not to the door structure, not to the side post, to the door itself. In which case, it gives a visible appearance of it being part of the door structure, designated for that purpose, and therefore it's mutter even when it's dragging on the floor. Eini, is that the case? That needs to be tied to the door itself? For Rabbi Tavla, Iklu Mechayza. Rabbi Tavla came to Mechayza, V'chaza lahudava toli b'ibra dedasha. And he saw this bolt which was hanging from the ibra dedasha. This was some sort of a beam of something that was part of the doorway structure, not the door itself. And even though it was actually tied just to that beam, not to the door itself, he didn't object to disallow its use on Shabbos. So we see that when something is dragging, as long as it's tied to any part of the doorway structure, it's okay. In that case, it was actually very well tied. The rope could actually sustain the weight of the bolt, in which case it's a proper connection, and therefore as long as it's tied to any part of the doorway structure, it's okay. So if it's not so well tied, if the rope can't sustain the weight of the bolt, then it needs to be tied to the door specifically to allow the nigrar. But if it's a proper tie, a proper connection, nital be'igdai, then it can be connected to any part of the doorway structure, not necessarily to the door itself. Rav Avia came to Nardo. He noticed this fellow that was kakater begami, who was using the bolt, which was nigrar, and this bolt was tied very flimsily to the door. Gami is a reed grass. Amar, so he said, Dain lenitrak. This thing here, this fellow should not use the bolt to close up the door, because a reed grass is worthless. It's not really considered to be tied to the door at all. So in this case, it's as though it's untied, it's as though it's just detached. And as we said earlier, when something's detached, certainly it's asr. Perhaps even asr midaraisa. So in conclusion, we follow Rabbi Yehuda, so even if it's dragging on the floor, it's mutter, provided it's properly attached. Either properly attached to the door, or if it's a real strong attachment, nital be'igdai, the rope can sustain the weight of this bolt, then even if it's attached to any part of the doorway structure, it's okay. But tying it with a gemi is really worthless, and it's considered like it's completely untied. Boy Reb Zera. Nikmaz Mao. So Reb Zera wants to know when the bolt is inserted in the threshold. Perhaps that hole gets widened and the bolt actually ends up going straight into the ground, into the earth below the threshold, can you continue using that bolt in this case as well? Amar Rav Yosef, what's the question? Lo Shmile, didn't he hear Hadasanya, the following brisa, Nishmat Asr? If the bolt was detached, then you cannot use it. Nikmaz mutar. However, if it sinks into the hole and goes straight into the floor below, that's still okay. That's not considered to be binyan. That's the shita of the Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer nikmaz afal pishein nishmat asr. If it's nikmaz, if it sinks into the hole, even if it's not detached from the door, it's asr. V'amar vidamar shmo halach Rabbi Yehuda b'nikmaz. We follow Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to nikmaz. V'taimamai, what's wrong with nikmaz? Why is it different than an ordinary bolt? Amar Abaye mishum demechzik boina. In this case, certainly it looks like he's building, because it's not being inserted into the threshold. It's sinking beyond the threshold, into the ground below. So it looks like he's building. It's like he's putting a nail into the ground. So there's no question. Nikmaz certainly is asr. So he asked Abaye the following question. We know that a bolt which is detached is asr. What about asaloi beis yad? Mao, what if he fashioned a handle for the bolt? So now it looks like a hammer. It looks like a utensil. It's pretty apparent that it's not just a nail being screwed into the ground. So he said, you're describing a buchna, a mortar, some type of hammer which is used to crush in the mortar. So of course, there's no concern of binyan. It looks like a kli. And of course, it is mutter. Some Mefarshim learn that this is in reference to the nikmas, so if it's sinking into the ground, but has a handle, in which case, once again, it mitigates that concern, and it doesn't look like boina. Itmar, Amar Nechome bar Ada, also lebesyad mutar. So he has well learned that a besyad is a positive element, and if it's added to the bolt, that mitigates any concerns. So in conclusion, regarding using this bolt, so it depends. We have three cases. We have the one that's tied, but it's nigrar, dragging a bit on the floor. We have the nega, which is completely detached. It's munach. And of course, we're speaking that doesn't have a handle. In which case, it looks just like a plain bolt, which is inserted into the ground. And we have the nikma situation, where it's sinking into the threshold, into the ground. We have two shitas. According to Tanakama, when the negar is tied, but it is dragging a bit, then it gives the appearance of a binyan. Doesn't look obvious that it's part of the doorway structure, and therefore it's asam d'rabbanan. When it's completely detached, sitting on the ground, of course it's asam not Torah, because you're just taking this construction material and inserting it into the threshold. And we had another brisa which discussed nikmaz, where according to Tanakama, even in that case it would be mutter. Review the shita is the negar is merely nigrar, so if it's tied properly to the door, or we had another couple of details on that, but if the point is that it's tied properly, then it's mutter, even if it's dragged on the floor. If it's just sitting around, it's munach, then minater, it's still not asa, because Rabbi Yehuda maintains, since it's designated for this use, we don't deem it like construction material. It's only asa d'rabbanan because it can be confused with building material. So it's asa d'rabbanan and is mutter in the Beis HaMikdash, not outside of it. And finally, when it comes to the nikmaz, so it's sinking through the threshold to the ground, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it appears like binyan, and it is asr. Continues the Gemara. How sharisa? There was this large beam, the hava bei Rabbi Pedas, which was in the home of Rabbi Pedas. The havu madlilo be'asar. So it was so heavy, it needed to be carried by 10 people, and 10 people would pick it up. V'shadila adasha, and would place it to support the door, to keep it locked at night. And he didn't protest. Rabbi Pedas, that is. He didn't say anything. Why wasn't he concerned with perhaps that it's muktzah, it's not meant to be moved? Amar ters kli aleh. This is a kli, although it's a large beam, but it has a din of a utensil. Rashi says it's right to sit on it, and therefore it can be moved on Shabbos. Hahi hasita, a similar case with a mortar, a large size mortar, the havas bei marshmol, which was in the home of marshmol, the havas machzekes adriba. It was so large that it could contain a half a kur, which is 15 so, huge amount. Shara Mar Shmuel Limishdaya Adasha. Shmuel allowed them to place it against the door. Amar Teres Kli. Likewise, in this case, he said, it's a Kli because it can be used for perhaps sitting on it, therefore it's not Muksa. Shalach le Rami Bar Yecheskel Rav Amram. So he sent a message to Rav Amram. Neimel and Mar, please tell us, Mehalin Mili Mal Yasa. Some of those good things, the Amrslan, which you've told us, Mishmei Rav Asi, Becheife the Arba. Some of those good things that you've told us in the name of Rav Asi concerning the Keife de Arba. Arba is a ship. Keife are those bent structures, those dome-like frames running across the ship. So Rashi explains as follows. You have a ship with, let's say, the two mechitzas of the ship, and you have the wooden structure, a semicircle running from one side to the other. And you have them lined up, a bunch of these semicircles, which are frames meant to be used as a frame to create a canopy. So they would spread a sheet or some mats over those frames to create a protection shelter in the ship. So this was a temporary oil. It wasn't oil outright. It's meant to be put on, taken off. So what about these kefi de arba? How do we use them on Shabbos? So the message was, send us some information. Why don't you send us some of the good things that you told us in the name of Rav Asi concerning the kefi de arba? Sholach he sent him as follows. Hochem Rav Asi. This is what Rav Asi said. Hani kefi de arba. These structures, these kefi, these bent wooden structures in the ship, how to use them? Bisman sheish ben tefach. When the semicircle has a tefach in width. So this piece of wood running across the ship is a tefach wide. In which case it itself has a din of oil, because something which is a roof which is a tefach wide is considered to be an oil. So once there's an oil in existence, then you can go ahead and add to a temporary oil on Shabbos. So Bisman sheish ben tefach, if there's already a tefach in existence, Inami, Eba and Tefach. Alternatively, the structure itself is not a Tefach wide. Each semicircle that is less than a Tefach wide, but they're situated so close to each other. Ve'ein bein zel shloisha, that there's less than 3 Tefachim in between these semicircles running over the ship. So we apply the concept of a loved. We deem them to be connected, and that allows you to go ahead and the next day, on Shabbos that is, to place something on top of it, a temporary canopy. L'machar, tomorrow on Shabbos, maybe a machzelis. He brings his mat or persalein and presents it over the structure. My time of why? Moisif al oil arayhu. Because he's simply adding to the to a temporary oil. He's simply adding to a pre-existing oil, and it's merely a temporary oil that he's forming, because these mats meant to be rolled and unrolled. It's not something of a permanent nature. So as long as there's something pre-existing, there's already a tefach there, then you can go ahead and add a temporary oil to that. So he's a moisiv al oil arayu v'shaper dami, and it's mutter. A similar halacha, hanu dichri, these rams, the havu le Rav Huna, which belong to Rav Huna, and during daytime, during summertime, they need to be exposed. They need to be covered. They need to be sheltered from the heat. But at night they would like to remove the canopy to provide them with fresh air. So to be mama bo'tula. During daytime they need to be protected. They need to be in the shade. Ubalayla bo'avir, at night they need fresh air. So this is the way they used to do it during weekdays. They used to cover them. They used to present the canopy above them during daytime. At night they would roll it away. How do we proceed on Shabbos? Also like a Rav. So he presented the shaila to Rav, how am I meant to go ahead for Shabbos? Amalei, he gave him a solution. He said, Zil kroich budya. So right before Shabbos, roll up the mat, v'shayir bo tefach, and leave a tefach. So don't completely remove the mat, leave a tefach unrolled, which gives it a minimum shir oil that allows you l'machar, the next day, pashta, pshata, and go ahead and unroll the mat. U'moisiv al oil arayu, He's simply adding to a temporary roof. V'shaper damin, that's mutter. Amar Rav Mishra B'chia. Vilain mutal and taisai umutal lefarke b'Shabbos. What about a curtain? You're allowed to go ahead and spread it. You're allowed to go ahead and collapse it on Shabbos. So you can add a vertical curtain. Rashi explains it's like a door. It's meant to be put up and taken down on a regular basis. It's not a permanent structure. And since it's not a oil is a roof, a horizontal structure. Here it's just vertical. It's a mechitza. A mechitza's arai, a temporary mechitza, can be formed even on Shabbos. Kilas chasanim, this bed canopy around the chasan's bed. So we have the bed, and on either side there was this pole going up, and then a pole across. That presented the structure for the canopy, and then they would go and spread a sheet over the bed. So the sheet was like an overturned triangle, coming to a peak and going back down. So once again, the oil halachically needs to have a tefach to be considered an oil. Tefach on top, the top surface of that oil. So what about this kilas chasanim? Can you go ahead and spread it and collapse it on Shabbos? Does it have a din of an oil, although it's an oil harai, but we can't initially create oil harai on Shabbos? So what is Allah? Kilas chasana mutal lefarka. You can go ahead and collapse the ula and toisa and to spread it out b'Shabbos. Amrav sheshes b'redar v'idi lo yamar. That's only said. This allowance is only given when it doesn't have a din of a oil. Ela she'ein begal tefach. When the top surface of that canopy is not a tefach wide. So it comes to a point and doesn't present an oil. Aval yesh begal tefach, but if there's a tefach on top, also. And even when there's no tefach at the top point, it is only allowed. We know that anything within 3 is considered to be one and the same. So when we just said that if the top point of the canopy is a point, is not a tefach, it's mutter. But that's only provided that within 3 to the top, to the crest, so within 3 tefachim, the canopy is not a tefach wide. Because even if it's within 3 tefachim, then that width of a tefach provides oil, constitutes oil. So either the top itself is a tefach wide, top surface is flat at tefach, or even it comes to a point, but if within the first 3 tefachim, it widens the tefach, that's considered to be like the top surface of that roof, of that canopy, and it's considered an oil. So again, if within 3 to the top, samach lagag, tefach does not have a tefach. Aval yesh b'pachos mishleisha, samach lagag tefach. But if it's a tefach wide, anywhere within 3 to the roof, to the top point, asr. One more stipulation, v'chi ein b'pachos mishleisha, samach lagag tefach. And even in the case where it doesn't widen to a tefach, within 3 tefachim to the top, that is also only mutter nami lo yamaran ela she'ein b'shipua tefach. The entire slope is not a tefach wide. So we have the canopy, and the midpoint of the canopy is here. So if the slope, meaning any side, the right or left of this canopy, stretches out a tefach from the midpoint of the canopy, even if it's at an angle, even if it's at a slope, if it ends up being a tefach away from that midpoint, so all the way on bottom, if it's a tefach away from the midpoint, that is also called an oil. Although it's a sloped oil, even a slopey oil is considered to be an oil. So this is only when ein b'shipur tefach, if it's slant, does not have a tefach. Aval yesh b'shipur tefach. But if the slant is a tefach wide, then that itself is called a oil. Shipuya aholim, ka'olam domo. Slanty tents, slanty roofs have a din of a roof. Rashi explains, apparently this canopy was built in a manner where you had lots of little zigzags on top. Because he says, where do we find a bed which is less than 2 tefach wide? It's not practical. So apparently they constructed it in the following manner. They had lots of little peaks on top, each one being less than a total of 2 tefachim, right? So this way each slant is less than a tefach from the midpoint. Lots of those zigzags. That's what the Gemara is speaking about. Then, of course, on the sides, they went down and closed the bed. So the point here is one and the same. A tefach creates a gag, creates an oil. And you cannot form an oil, even oil Arayan Shabbos. However, you can go ahead and add to a pre-existing oil. Once again, if it already had a tefach, you can go add to that if it's just a temporary oil. And we learned as well that creating a mechitza aray is also mutter on Shabbos. V'amrav shisha b'rei Rav Idi, siyana shari. A person may wear this felt hat, and apparently it had a wide brim. It's mutter on Shabbos. V'atanya asa. We have a brayso which says that it's asa. Like kasha, the answer is depends if it had a wide brim or not. Hada is bei tefach, hada less bei tefach. When the brayso says it's asa, when the brim was wide, a tefach wide, in which case it has a din of an oil. So therefore you can't wear an oil on Shabbos. Placing the hat on his head results in creation of a oil. Hadles be'tefach. The halacha of Rav Shesha B'Davida, where he allows wearing the siyana, speaking when it's a narrow brimmed hat, which doesn't make an oil. Elo me'ata, if that's the case, shariv b'glime tefach. The person spreads his cloak out in a way that he creates a tefach canopy. Hachanami the asar. You want to say it's asar? Of course not. It's his beged. It's not an oil. How can you say that placement of a hat on one's head is considered to be an oil and asar? Elul kash. The answer is hada mahadik. Hadlei mahadik. Certainly, there's no concern of oil when it comes to a person's hat, his clothing. Not considered to be structures. They're just his garden that are bottled in. Rather, the discussion here is regarding concern of perhaps coming to carry on Shabbos. So if the head is fastened, it's mihadik, it's fastened or tied to his head, then there's no concern of it flying off and being carried on Shabbos. When the Brayta says you cannot wear the siyana, it's speaking where the hat is loose on his head and there's a concern that it might slip off. And it may result in being carried in Rishus Rabbim on Shabbos. Continues the Mishnah. Machzirin tziratachtem b'migdash. So we have a chest which has a door. The door has 2 hinges. An upper hinge, which is the tzir ha'elyon, and the lower hinge, which is the tzir ha'tachton. Now, one of those hinges slipped out, got dislocated. Can you go ahead and restore it? So it depends. The upper hinge entails a malacha of baina. He's really fixing that chest because it's a whole job to restore that upper hinge. Whereas when it comes to merely the lower hinge, that doesn't really entail a proper malacha. It's easy to slip it back into place, and therefore it's only midrabanan. And the concern is because it might lead a person to bring along his tools and to go ahead and fashion it properly, which involves a malacha deraisa. So midrabanan, you can't even slip it back for concern that it may lead to a malacha. Says the Mishnah, machzirin tzirat tachtim b'migdash. However, if the tzirat tachtim slips out in the Beis Hamikdash, we know einish shvus b'migdash. When it pertains to karbanis, Chacham did not apply their isser. So even if the hinge slips out, in which case it would be asam d'Rabbanan. That's only outside the Beis Hamikdash. In the Beis Hamikdash, you may go ahead and restore it. Avaloi b'Medina, but not outside the Beis Hamikdash. Ve'elyon, if the upper hinge slips out, that entails real boina, real isser malacha, kan v'kan asr. Therefore, it's asr whether in or without of the Beis Hamikdash. So Tanakama holds that actually fashioning even a kli is a deraisa of boina. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he takes a step down. He says even if the upper hinge slips out, since we're speaking about a kli, he holds there's no din of binyan midoraisa when it comes to a kli. It's only a midrabanan. Therefore, if the upper one slips out, the isra rabbanon is applied, but only outside the Beis Hamikdash, but not inside the Beis Hamikdash. Ha'elyon b'migdash. If the upper one slips out, you can't restore it outside the Beis Hamikdash, but in the Beis Hamikdash you can because it's only rabbanon. But if the low one slips out, in which case Rabbi Yehuda maintains there isn't even an isra rabbanon, but Medina, so it can be restored even outside the Beis Hamikdash. So in conclusion, when it comes to the hinge which slipped out, according to the Tanakama, the upper hinge entails Issa Deraisa, it's proper binyan, whereas the lower hinge only involves Rabbanon, which is Asr outside the Beis Hamikdash, according to Rabbi Yehuda. When the lower one slips out, it's mutter completely, all over. There's no Issa Rabbanon even. When it comes to the upper hinge, that involves the Issa Rabbanon, and is Asr outside the Beis Hamikdash, but in the Beis Hamikdash, certainly it's mutter. And of course we're speaking because it's a Kli. But if it would be an in-ground door, certainly anything you do there is considered to be baina, as we're going to see in the Gemara. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brayso that Sir, the hinge of the door of the delis, of the shida, this was a wagon, teva, a chest, a migdal, an armory, closet, b'migdash machsir. So speaking, if the lower hinge slips out, which only entails Issa Rabban, so in the Beis Hamikdash you can go and restore it. But Medina doichken. However, outside the Beis Hamikdash, you can't go ahead and restore it if it was completely dislocated. However, let's say it just slightly slipped out of its place. It's not completely out of place. Doichken, you can just nudge it back into its place. According to all shittas, there's no concern whatsoever. He's not really repairing anything. But the upper hinge, kan v'kan leyachse. Whether in or out of the Beis Hamikdash, you cannot go ahead and restore it because that entails Issa D'Oraisa. Why? Because he's forming a Kli. He's properly repairing a Kli which broke apart. He's taking something which was a non-functioning Kli and restoring its function. And that entails Issa D'Oraisa of Binyan. Therefore, it cannot be done even at Beis Hamikdash. Now, what's wrong with the restoration of the lower hinge? That's only midrabanan because the Kli is still considered to be a functioning Kli. But there's a concern, gzeira shemayitka, that he might bring his tools and bang it back in place, which entails Issa D'Oraisa. If he should do so, he's chayav chatas. So this is concerning a Kli. Shel bar. What about a dislocated hinge in a bar, in a pit in the ground? Shel dus. Dus is, some explain this to mean a pit, but it has a built structure around the perimeter. So it's an in-ground structure, not just a hole in the ground. So a different form of an in-ground arrangement, shayatzia, or a door of some sort of shed. So all these are mechubel karka. In this case, even a slight modification entails Issa D'Oraisa. Lo yachzer, he shouldn't even restore the lower hinge. If he should do so, he's chayav chatas. So the point here is that when it comes to an in-ground structure, anything that's done involves binyan. Any small modification is binyan and asma d'oraisa. When it comes to a kli, it works with different guidelines. Over there, it's based on the concept of functionality. So, if he's restoring its functionality, which it had completely lost, like when it comes to restoring the upper hinge, which was dislocated, according to all shittas, it's asa. According to Tanakama, it would be asa menat Torah. But when it comes to the lower hinge, in which case it was still considered to be a functioning kli, even Tanakam would agree that's only asr with the Rabban. In this case, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's mutal chatchil. So in summary, to restore a dislocated hinge. So it depends. If we're speaking about a chest, a wagon, these kalim. So according to Tanakama, when it comes to restoring the lower hinge, it's only asr with the Rabban because the kli is still considered a functioning kli. It's not a real significant act of repair. Whereas when it comes to the upper hinge, in which case the kli is completely a non-functioning kli, that's considered to be a proper binyan and asr min haTorah. Rabbi Yehuda takes a step down. Rabbi Yehuda says that the lower hinge is mutal chatchila because what did he do? He didn't really accomplish much. When it comes to the upper hinge, he says it's only asr d'Rabbanan because Rabbi Yehuda maintains that there's no concept of building when it comes to a kli. And therefore, even if he restores the upper hinge, there's no Issa min haTorah. At most, it's only Asr Midrabanan because it looks like building. That's concerning a kli. When it comes to something which is Bakarka, all agree. Even the slightest modification, the slightest repair, even restoring the lower hinge, would be Asr min haTorah. Continues the Mishnah. Machzirin Retiya b'mikdash. Here we're going to speak about a bandage which has an ointment on it, a cream, and the person already had, the kohen already had it on him to cover his wound. He needed to remove it to enable him to do the avoid in the Beis Hamikdash because the bandage formed a interposition, a chatzitza between himself and the avodah was a barrier. He needs to directly touch the kli, etc. So this bandage was getting in the way. He had to remove it to enable him to do the service in the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Mishnah, although restoring the bandage would involve Isam D'Rabbanan, we're concerned that perhaps that will lead him to go smear the ointment, which is a malacha d'oraisa, a malacha v'machik, one of the 39 of his malachas. But since it was for the sake of the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, once again, ein shvus b'mikdash. Therefore, says the Mishnah, machzir and roti b'mikdash. You can restore, return, replace the bandage on his hand when it's in the Beis Hamikdash. Aval Medina, but outside the Beis Hamikdash, in which case it doesn't involve avodah, the Chacham does not allow him even to return the bandage which should be removed, because he might go ahead and smear the cream, the ointment, which involves a malach. In betchila. Now, if he's trying to initiate things, meaning that this kohen never had this bandage here. He didn't have it and removed it for the sake of avodah. He never had it. He's trying to initiate, to place a new bandage on his hand. Kam v'kan aser. Whether in the Beis Hamikdash, whether out of the Beis Hamikdash, it's aser. Because the only allowance here is for the sake of the avodah. So if he had it on his hands, he was compelled to remove it to enable him to do avodah. Yeah, then there's a special dispensation here. Ein shvus b'mikdash. And the kohen can go ahead and restore it. But in the absence of this element, just by the mere fact that he's standing in the Beis Hamikdash, that wouldn't allow him to go ahead and put back the rati and place a rati on his hand for concern that it might lead him to do an issa deres. So there's a special heter when it pertains to avodah, but otherwise not. Now, actually, when he's initiating a new compress on his wound, there were actually two concerns. Number one, the concern that we just mentioned, that he might go ahead and smear the ointment. But there's another factor, as an Mepharshim point out, that Taisus points out, that if a person initiates some sort of remedy on Shabbos, there's another Isam D'Rabbanan, because it might lead him to crush the grind the ingredients, which is a malach of Teichen, which we discussed many times in Shabbos. So when he initiates a remedy, there are actually two concerns. There's a concern of crushing the ingredients and also smearing the ointment. The reason why in our discussion here we're not making reference to crushing the ingredients, because we're speaking about a case where it was already on him. Mishnah speaks about machzir and retir. He already applied it to himself, in which case it says there's no concern of crushing ingredients. He's not fashioning the remedy on Shabbos. So that concern is off the table. Rather, the concern is simply because even if we allow him just to replace a removed bandage, he might go ahead and smear the bandage, smear the ointment, and that involves a malacha. So that's another concern, another rabbinic concern, which, as we just said, will not be applied when it negates the malach, the avoid in the Beis Hamikdash. Tana Rabbanan, Retia sheparsham al gabi makkah. Machzirin b'Shabbos. Let's say it slipped off. He didn't actually remove it. It just fell off his hand. He can go ahead and restore it on Shabbos, according to all Shitas. Rashi explains because this is something which is uncommon to happen. And as we know, generally the Chacham did not apply an Isser when something was not Shchiach. So it's only when he actually physically removed it do we have a concern. But if it slips out, that's something which is not Shchiach, and the Chacham did not include in the Gzeir. Rabbi Yehuda Huchalka. Rabbi Yehuda says if it totally slips off his hand, he can't go ahead and put it back. That's considered like, in that case we have the Gzeir. But it's only when it slightly slips off. It's still there, but it slips away from his wound. Yeah, that we allow. If it slips below the wound, he can push it back up to the wound. If it slips upward, push it back down to the wound. But if it completely falls off his wound, Rabbi maintains there's no heter, he can't go ahead and restore it. Now, if he'd like to wipe off the pus from his wound, how does he go about it? Without removing the bandage. He uncovers part of the wound, part of the bandage which is covering his wound, then wipes the wound, then he goes and he uncovers the other side of the bandage, and wipes his wound. However, the actual bandage he should not wipe, because he's going to inevitably smooth out the cream, the ointment. If he goes ahead and he actually does that, because that's a malacha, a mamachik. So the Hanakama says, If the bandage slips off his hand completely, you can go ahead and return it to his hand. According to Rabbi Yehuda, no, we don't allow it. Only if it slips off a bit, but if it completely left his hand, it's us. So who's the halacha follow? Rabbi Yehuda. We follow Rabbi Yehuda. But even if it fell off, it was pirush, you cannot go ahead and put it back. This discussion, this machlekes, where Rabbi Yehuda says even if it falls off his hand, he can't go ahead and put it back. That's only elashepir shal gabekli. This machlekes, where the Tanakama allows and Rabbi Yehuda does not allow, only applies to a case where the bandage fell off and it landed on a kli. It didn't land on the ground. In which case Tanakama says, well, putting it back on his hand is not considered like initiating a remedy. It's not called like he's doing it b'tchila, because it's still on the kli here, it's close by, and he's just putting it back. But if it fell on the floor itself, all agree it's asa, because once it falls down on the floor, it's considered to have been detached completely from him, and to allow him to put it back, that involves an isser, according to all shittas. So again, for clarity, when the bandage falls off, Tanakama says you can go and put it back, Rabbi Yehuda says you can't. The Gemara tells us that's only if it falls on the kli, but if it falls on the karka, all agree, you can't go ahead and restore it. Because it's considered like you're initiating it. Omar Mar Baravashi. So Mar, the son of Rashi, says, I was standing in front of my father, and I observed him as follows. Nofle Abisadya, his bandage slipped off his hand and fell onto the pillow, which is a kli, and he went ahead and restored it. He put it back on the wound. So I asked him, I told him, Mar, do you not hold of Lahadra Amar Rav Chizda? Rav Chizda said, that the discussion is pertaining to where the bandage fell into a kli. In which case, Tanakama says it's mutter, Rabbi Yehuda says it's asr, and the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, right? But if it falls on the ground, all agree it's asr. But Amar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Yehuda, and Shmuel told us clearly that halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda. In which case, we conclude that even if it falls on a kli, we're meant to be stringent. We're not meant to put it back on the wound. So in your case, sure, it fell onto the pillow, which is a kli, but we went to follow Rabbi Yehuda, who says it's asr. Amarli, so my father, Rav Asher, responded, I never heard that. Meaning, I don't agree with it. I hold that the machlekes pertains to where it falls on the karka. Tanakama says you can put it back, Rabbi Yehuda says you can't, and we follow Rabbi Yehuda's shita. But that's strictly when it fell on the karka, but it falls on the kli, which is close by, which is still considered to be close at hand and designated for my use. It's not down on the ground below, it's still, in that case, all agree. It hasn't completely detached from the person and is mutter to be returned back to the wound. So in my case, there's no machlekes. Sure, we follow Rabbi Yehuda, but that only pertains to the case where it fell on the karka, which is the context of the machlekes. But in the case where it falls on a kli, all agree it's mutter. So in conclusion, if this bandage slightly slipped off the wound, but it's still on him, all agree you can put it back, slip it back to the wound. If you removed it, can you go ahead and restore it? Well, outside the Beis HaMikdash you can't, because there's a concern. It's in the Rabbanon. You might go ahead and smear the cream or the ointment. If that happened in the Beis HaMikdash, and it was removed initially to enable him to do the avodah, then no shvus is applied, and he can go ahead and restore his bandage. What if it slipped off his hand and ended up on a kli, or down on the floor, according to the other opinion? We have machlekes. According to Tanakama, since this is not a common occurrence, there's no Issa D'Rabbanan, and he can go ahead and restore his bandage. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even in this case, it would be asr. Continues the Mishnah. Kaishrin nima b'mikdash. One may go ahead and repair the violin string, which snapped on Shabbos in the Beis HaMikdash, in order to enable the Levi to play music during the time of the akrava of the karbanos, because we're following the shita that allows Chilul Shabbos, allows a malacha to be done not only for the mitzvah itself, for the carbon itself, but also for the machshirei carbon, for the enablers of the carbon, the accessories of the carbon, in this case the music. Avalei b'Medina, certainly not outside the Beis HaMikdash, because it entails a malacha. Which malacha? Kosher. But to initiate, kan v'kan asa. That can't be even in the Beis HaMikdash. So if it snapped before Shabbos, in which case he had the option of fixing it before Shabbos, he cannot do a malacha in this case. It's only if there's no alternative. If it happened on Shabbos itself, it's the Efshar La'asosim Erev Shabbos. But if it happened before Shabbos, in which case he had the option of doing it before Shabbos, that does not justify, does not override Chilul Shabbos. Continues the Gemara. V'raminu. So Mishnah told us you can tie the violin string that snapped on Shabbos. But the Brisa speaks about simply creating a bow, which is allowed, but not actually tying. V'raminu. Nimas kino shenifsaka. What if the violin string snapped on Shabbos? Lo yakoshra. He wouldn't be allowed to tie it, which involves a malacha, elo oiva, but merely to create a bow, to fix it in that manner. Like Kasha, the answer is harabanan, v'Rabbi. The Brisa which insists on forming a bow is following Shittas Rabbanan, who say that only the carbon itself can override Shabbos, but not the accessories of the carbon. In this case, the preparation of music, that doesn't justify a malach on Shabbos. Therefore, you can form a bow which doesn't entail a malach. It's not considered to be a knot and not a malach. Whereas the Mishnah which allows knotting a kesher, which involves a malacha, is following Rabbi Yehuda, who says that not only is the carbon deicha Shabbos, but even the machshiri carbon, such as the music, justifies a malach on Shabbos. Explains the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda the Amar machshiri mitzvah deicha Shabbos koishra. So according to him, since machshiri mitzvah al deicha Shabbos, you can go and tie the violin which snapped on Shabbos. The Rabbanon, however, the Amri ein deicha, they hold that machshiri mitzvah al deicha Shabbos oinva. Only thing he's allowed to do is form a bow to repair his violin in that manner. If the mission is following Rabbi Yehuda, even to initiate on Shabbos should be allowed. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't differentiate between a case where he had a viable option of doing it before Shabbos or not. In that case, Rabbi Yehuda allows a malacha for machshir mitzvah. He equates the accessory of the mitzvah with the mitzvah itself. So, in contrast with our Mishnah, which presents the halacha strictly in the case where he had no choice, it snapped on Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda would allow even if he initiates on Shabbos. So apparently our Mishnah is not following Rabbi Yehuda. Ella like kasha, apparently we have to answer like this. Ha Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. Both the Mishnah and the Brisa hold that although you can do malacha for machshirei mitzvah, that's only when there's no option, alternative. Therefore, the Brisa says, look, you have an option of forming a bow and repairing your violin in that manner, do so, because you can avoid malacha. Whereas the Mishnah is following Shittas Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that forming a bow is tantamount to tying a knot. It's also malacha. Therefore, there's no preference to forming a bow over tying a knot. So that's the Shitta reflected in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Libaduman. Who is Rabbi Yehuda following? If he's following Rabbi Yehuda, so even to initiate is mutter. Meaning, in the broader context of the discussion regarding machshirei mitzvah being deicha Shabbos. So we mentioned that according to Rabbi Yehuda, even if there is an alternative, even if he initiates on Shabbos, he can do so. There's no limitation when it comes to machshirei mitzvah. So, in contrast to the Rabbanan, who insist that it's only allowed when there's no option, no other alternative. Now Rabbi Yehuda, which is now the Tan of our Mishnah, which says you can go and tie the violin. Whose shita is he following? Is he following Rabbi Yehuda? Then why does the Mishnah speak about a violin which snapped on Shabbos itself, but to initiate is also, according to Rabbi Yehuda, even initiating is mutter. Ella, like Kasha, apparently we have to answer the contradiction a bit differently. We have the Mishnah which speaks about tying the snap violin, whereas the Brisa which speaks about forming a bow in specific. Like Kasha answers like this. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbanan. Is a core machlekes here. Whether machshirei mitzvah deicha Shabbos. The Rabbanan hold yes. It's deicha Shabbos provided you have an alternative. And that sheet is reflected in our Mishnah. So if it snaps on Shabbos, you can tie it. Whereas the Brisa speaks about forming a bow. And that's following sheet of Rabbi Shimon, who says only the carbon is deicha Shabbos, but not the machshirin of the carbon. So at most you can do is form a bow which doesn't entail a malach. Where do we find this machlekes? Harab Shimon Haraban Desanya. Ben Levi shenifsika lima bekinar. If the violin string of the Ben Levi was snapped on Shabbos, Kaishra, you can go ahead and tie it. This is Shitas Rabbanan, because it happened on Shabbos, and you had no option. Reb Shimon, even if it happened on Shabbos, you can't go ahead and do a malacha for the accessory of a mitzvah. At most you can do is form a bow, which doesn't entail a malacha. Reb Shimon Lazar Eimer, he's responding to them. He says, look, Rabbanan, what are you saying? Go ahead and repair it with this improvised repair, tying the string. It's not really worth much. Afi eina mashmasa koil. It's not going to produce a proper sound. So once you're doing a malacha, do it properly. Ela mashalshel milmata v'korech milmala. Rather, run the string, well, assuming that the string which snapped still has some body to it. So you can pull it up from below, lift it, bring it up to the peg on top of the violin, and wrap it there and tighten it. So although that involves a malacha, Rashi explains, he's forming a kli, it's makeh patish, he's producing a kli, but once you're doing a malacha, you're tying, may as well do it properly to produce a proper sound by forming this uninterrupted continuous thread, continuous string, rather than tying it in the middle. So mishal shemalamata v'korchamal, either pick it up, unroll it from the bottom, and pull it to the top end, and wrap it around the peg on top to tighten it, or the other way, or mishal shemalamala, or pull it down from the top, v'korchamalata, and wrap it around the peg on bottom. So in any case, when it comes to our stira, we have an answer. The Mishnah is speaking about Shitas Rabbanan, who allow malacha. There's no alternative, even for the sake of machshir mitzvah, whereas the Brisa speaks about bowing, making a bow, is Rabbi Shimon does not allow a malacha for the sake. Another pshat, hava Rabbanan. Both the Mishnah and the Brisa reflect Shitas Rabbanan, who theoretically allow malacha in this context, however, only if it's necessary. For the kasha, the answer is, depends where the string snapped, and whether it necessitates tying a proper knot, or whether a bow is sufficient. Kan be'emtza, the Mishnah is speaking where it snapped in the middle. In the middle, then you need to tie a proper knot to get it back to function properly. And that's reflected in our Mishnah. Kamen outside, the Brisa, which insists on forming a bow, is speaking where it snapped off to the side. In that case, a bow is sufficient to produce a proper musical sound. Both the Mishnah and the Brisa are speaking where it snapped in the middle. The Mishnah is following Shitas Rabbanan. The Brisa, Shitas Reb Shimon. Now, according to this approach, even Reb Shimon agrees you can do a malacha for machshirei mitzvah when there's no viable alternative. So theoretically, you should be able to tie the violin string which snapped in the middle, which requires knotting. However, Reb Shimon maintains there's a concern, there's a gzeira. Perhaps next time it's going to happen on the side where a knot isn't pertinent, and he'll continue knotting it even there. Therefore, Reb Shimon says, even if it's snapped in the middle where a knot is required, I don't allow it. Just form a bow and that's it. So that explains the discrepancy between the Mishnah and the Brisa. Both the Mishnah and the Brisa are speaking where it's snapped in the middle, where theoretically a knot is crucial. However, Ma'asavar Gazrin, Reb Shimon says, we don't allow it. We're concerned that next time it's going to snap on the side, where a knot is not crucial, a bow is sufficient, therefore I only allow bows. Ma'asavar Gazrin, Rabbanan hold, we don't apply this concern, this gzeira, and therefore, as long as it snaps in the middle, where a knot is required, we allow him to make a knot. And that opinion is reflected in our Mishnah. So in conclusion, if this violin string snapped on Shabbos, we have a Mishnah which says you can tie it. Brisa says you can only form a bow. We have three approaches. Number one, the Mishnah is following the Rabbanan who hold that accessories of a mitzvah are deicha Shabbos, whereas the Brisa is following Reb Shimon who holds machshir are not deicha. Therefore, only a bow is allowed. Approach number two, the Mishnah and Brisa are both following Shittas Rabbanan that machshir are deicha Shabbos. The Mishnah is speaking where it's snapped in the middle and a knot is required. The Brisa is speaking it happened on the side where a bow is sufficient. Approach number three is that the Mishnah is following Shittas Rabbanan. So if it's snapped in the middle, you can go tie it. The Brisa says, Reb Shimon says, even if it's snapped in the middle, we don't only allow him to make a bow. We're concerned that next time it's going to snap on the side where a bow is sufficient. Therefore, we only allow a bow in all cases. And of course, you have Shittas Rabbi Eliezer, who says, even if you had a viable option to avoid Chilul Shabbos, if it's snapped before Shabbos, you can go ahead and do a malacha for the sake of machshirei mitzvah. Okay, time for a brief chazara of today's daf. Regarding the neger, using that bolt in the threshold, we learned that's only allowed when it appears like part and parcel of that door apparatus. We can add on a temporary oil on Shabbos. We got him restoring a hinge. It depends if it's a lower hinge or the upper hinge. We learned about returning a bandage to a wound on Shabbos and repairing the violin to allow the Ben Levi to play music in the Beis HaMikdash.